So how it came about is I have an extensive background in tennis, and recently I've been looking at, in particular, around boys and understanding my expertise in tennis, and also over the last 7 years I've been involved with boarding schools. So really trying to understand the athlete better, I looked at boys and how to better understand the boy, so coaches can get more out of them, and also the boys can get more out of what they do. So I put together a few little articles around why boys ask a lot of questions and understanding, so that the coaches can have something to work with. And then from that, I have Mike Barrell, who's the one who he owns Evolve Tennis, which is Evolve 9 Tennis, which is a big tennis program over in the UK. Him and I started talking, and he said, Ryan, I'd love for you to present based on your experience over the last 7 years, in particular being involved in tennis to the high level that I've been, but then in boarding schools, and how we can help coaches when it comes specifically around boys, because there's a lot out there for girls, but not so much for boys. So,
were you thinking, when you started to learn what you learned, were you thinking that this had just as many translations for off the tennis court as it did for on the tennis court?
Oh, look, I suppose the way I looked at it is you could translate this into definitely as a coach and in the boarding, because there's a lot of transferable skills across what you do. Sure. And I think the biggest thing is about making sure that boys want to be trusted. They want to have a trusted space. And a lot of the times, boys, to develop that trusted space, want to make sure you're engaging with them and stuff like that. And I think that's paramount even on the tennis court, because when you've got a one-on-one relationship, unlike a team sport, it's all about the coach and you, and it's all about how you develop that space. And if you're not there for their interest, I think the boys in particular, they don't want anything to do with you. But once they develop that trusted space, I believe you've got them, and you can get the best out of them. And I think that's important in both boarding, but in particular when we look at things on the tennis court. And that's where my article was looking at. It's
really interesting because it sort of flies in the face of that cliche, and it's a cliche that comes particularly from boarding schools, that the master, the teacher, is to be obeyed at all cost, and he teaches, but you don't allow a friendship to develop or anything like that. So it's completely different to what we've taken for granted for so long, haven't we?
And the world has changed, especially a lot in boarding schools. I mean, you look at Toowoomba Grammar, which I'm proud to be part of now. It's close to 150 or 145 years old. But how the education framework has changed over that time has been amazing, and in particular for boys. And boys, I think they're trying to find, especially in today's digital world, I've spoken a few of the things about how years gone by, it was all about, boys were the hunters. They're the ones who go out there, they do the manual labour, they do the hard yards. Things have changed now. The work environment has changed, the landscape has changed, and I think boys probably lost their identity a bit. And I think that's probably why they started asking a lot more questions around, because the hard yakka and that is not as much as what it is now compared to white collar and what you do in that field. And I think the pressure that's now involved around sport is really massive on boys. And it's always been you just got to take it on the shoulder and move on. But it's understanding going, well, no, there are boys who are suffering a lot when it comes to psychological pressure. And I think it's developing that relationship. And if you're able to do that as a coach, I believe technically, you'll be able to, technical, especially in tennis, is important. So technically you've got to be sound, but if you can develop that trusted space, I think you're going to get more out of a male player rather than a female, because the boys, they know you're there for them.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's where it was coming from.
Is it a fine line between developing that compassionate, getting to know them, forming that relationship, but also trying to develop that winning instinct? It's a really fine line between something that's really quite brutal, that winning at all cost instinct, but also having that caring, sharing approach.
Definitely. And I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, you always want to get out there and win, and most coaches and all players want to get out there and win. I think you don't lose that winning edge, but I think to make that winning edge, to sharpen it and make it more succinct and make it more direct in terms of what you're after, I think you've got to develop that trusted space first. So it's not that you lose it, I think you have this one first, and then that's going to help sharpen that a lot quicker. It's like a slingshot where a slingshot, what you do normally is you take the sling back in the, like in the elastic band, so you absorb all that, and that's all the questioning, that's all the stuff that you do beforehand, and that's the conversations between you and the player. That's the questions that they just keep asking. And as I said in my talking a lot about, is that it can be annoying questions. It can be questions that they're asking over and over again, and you're thinking, they just don't get it, or they're not listening to me. And I'm sitting there going, well, I don't think it's that. I think the boys are trying to suss out a few things in regards to you.
Right.
So the first couple of questions aren't really the question that they're really asking. The first couple of questions is this person here for the right reasons? Yeah. And then they'll check again. So that's that fair. And then once you develop that and you let it go, that's where I say you'll be able to move on quicker. Yeah. You'll get to maybe the step 2 or 3 or 4 quicker than if I just went that way without absorbing those questions first, because the boy's like, okay, he's here for me, and he's going to then go gung-ho. So that's where I think you'll be able to get there and you have that winning edge, and I think it will sharpen their winning edge.
You talk about, though, embracing there's a lot of different learning styles amongst any group of 30 boys. There's going to be maybe 30 different learning styles. How do you come up with a way of breaking through and appealing to each of those different learning styles? Is that a challenge?
Oh, definitely. It's a massive challenge, especially around, like you said, all the different boys that are out there. And even in particular, you can have like country kids, city kids and all that, and how they interact. I think the biggest thing is how they interact with you. And the best thing is having that, don't give flippant answers. I think that's one thing that helps develop those relationships first. And then from that, being able to identify, okay, is this person a kinesthetic learner, or is this person an auditory learner, or is this person someone who wants to read something? And if you're able to show that, once again, the boy's going, okay, this coach knows me, this teacher knows me. And I think that's a big thing, because a lot of the times we just blanket and say, okay, let's answer these questions. I'll give them a video on tennis and go, let's all watch this. Some boys will get it, but some boys won't. But it's understanding, going, okay, and tennis is a one-on-one sport. So it's one of the things going, okay, we're going to have this same example that I want you to look at, but I'm going to get you to look at it visually. I'm going to get you to look at it, by writing things down for me, and we'll have a discussion about it and stuff like that. And if you're able to do that, it requires work. But if you're able to do that, I believe you're going to get the most out of the boy, because once again, he knows, okay, he's here for me, and this is a trusted space, and there's no such thing as a dumb question, And I always say, be careful in your answers. Don't give flippant responses, because if you just give a flippant response, like just off the cuff, I think that impacts the boys. I think it impacts girls, but I do believe it impacts boys even more.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think it's tougher to be a teenage boy in this day and age than it was even back when you were at school?
Yeah, definitely. I think pressure, especially around performance and especially around sport and things, I definitely think it is tougher. I think tougher to a certain, I suppose a different type of toughness. The exposure and the social media that is out there now, I think that has put a limelight, especially on boys. Yeah. And schools, this is one thing about boarding schools, in particular with sport and that, is that it's an amazing place where boys can really shine, but it also is an amazing place where boys can have a lot of pressure because of the limelight of the history and the traditions and everything that this place offers, and GPS levels and stuff like that. And
I suppose the relentlessness of, you can't go and get your sanctuary from your bedroom or your favourite part of the house. You're sort of here with your fellow classmates for all day, every day.
And it's a big thing is understanding that everyone wants a little bit of that. He's got to give 110% at everything, in his music lesson, in his academic lessons, in his cadet lessons, and in his sport lessons. And I'm like, that's a lot for a 17-year-old kid to take, or even a 14-year-old kid to take. So one thing I try to develop in my time, coming from a very expert high level in tennis to now working in an educational environment, is understanding those things and being able to tell the boy or tell the athlete that that's okay, and we're going to work with this, because you've got to show interest in all those other areas. If I'm going to get the best of him out in the tennis court, I've got to make sure that he's academically and everything else he's doing right, and I've got to make sure that it's all, because that's going to get the best out of him, and that's what it's all about. And I'm like, you need to have those areas put into place. And then the other thing is also understanding that they're still schoolboys. So even though we offer them elite pathways and we have some really high coaches and really expert programs in line, they're still going to make schoolboy errors, and trying to get them to understand that process through their questions and the amount of questions they ask, I think helps them develop hopefully better into better athletes and better young men.